Today's lesson is a timely look at the history of timekeeping. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
Hello, I'm Kiki.
And today we're going to continue talking about the history of timekeeping. Now, as we said last time, we pretty much take timekeeping for granted now. Our cell phones, our smartphones, our watches, our computers will tell us what time it is anytime we want to know. But again, this wasn't always the case. People sometimes did not know what time it was during the day, so they came up with various inventions like the sundial, right?
That's right. And on our first day, we talked about the sundial being arguably the first invention of telling time. So some people might disagree. And there are other clocks that were invented, like the water clock and also mechanical clocks, as well as the pendulum clock.
Indeed, and we did talk about the quartz clocks, which became very reliable and very accurate. And, of course, we've got quartz crystals in almost everything we use these days. I think I've got one right here on my wrist here. I'm wearing a Casio watch, which is a quartz watch. It has a quartz crystal inside of it, and it is very accurate. So let's find out some more things about timekeeping in today's lesson. Let's continue to talk about other inventions they had. Here comes the first paragraph.
Past timekeeping devices made it possible for people to keep tabs on time. Nevertheless, they weren't always useful for preventing individuals from oversleeping. That particular function would come with the invention of the wind-up alarm clock in 1876.
大家好，我们来看第一部分中的单字 nevertheless。它是副词，意思是然而、不过或是尽管如此。例如 Mandy was tired. Nevertheless, she made dinner for her children. Mandy 觉得很累，然而她还是为孩子们做晚餐。或是 I missed the beginning of the play, but had a good time nevertheless. 我错过了这出戏的开头，但仍看得很开心。再来介绍动词 oversleep， 它的意思是睡过头。例如Diana overslept nearly every day until she bought a much louder alarm clock. Diana 几乎每天都睡过头，直到她买了一个声音大很多的闹钟。又或者是 Kevin always stays up late, so he oversleeps very often. Kevin 总是熬夜，所以他常常睡过头。
Okay, let's talk about the first paragraph. Past timekeeping devices made it possible for people to keep tabs on time. Nevertheless, they weren't always useful for preventing individuals from oversleeping. Okay, so in modern day, we have so many different ways to keep time and tell time, but I think there's always an excuse in class. Someone's always oversleeping and always coming to class late. And when you ask them, why are you late? Oh, I overslept. But you have your iPad, you have your iPhone, you have so many things to set your alarm, and yet you still overslept. So, especially in the past, before we had all these modern day technologies, there were other types of devices that were made possible for people to keep tabs on time. When you keep tabs on something, it's basically like you're keeping track on something or keeping an eye on something. So in this case, we want to keep track of time. So we want to keep tabs on it. We want to watch it and understand it and find out more about time.
Yep, to keep tabs on something. You could also say to keep track of something. Like lots of parents like to keep tabs on their children at all times to make sure they don't get in trouble. And yes, indeed, we do have the problem of people oversleeping. That probably happened a lot before the invention of the alarm clock. And so, of course, that was a big change. And again, if you oversleep, that means you just sleep beyond the time you're supposed to get up. I never needed an alarm clock when I was a kid because we had an obnoxious cat that would always be hungry at the same time of the morning every day at about 6 a.m. And the cat would come into my room and start batting his paws on the Venetian blinds. That was a very obnoxious sound, and if that wouldn't wake you up, I don't know what will. But again, we're talking about past timekeeping devices like the sundial and the water clock. And yes, indeed, people could keep tabs on time, but still, nevertheless, they weren't useful enough for stopping people from oversleeping. So if we have the word nevertheless there, that means the previous thing is true, but still something else is true. And the previous truth does not change the fact of the second truth. So yes, indeed, it did help us keep track of time. Still, nevertheless, they didn't stop us from oversleeping. And of course, we could still use that excuse then. But now with the alarm clocks, we don't have that excuse anymore.
That particular function would come with the invention of the wind-up alarm clock in 1876. So because people were oversleeping, they needed a way to solve this problem, so they invented a wind-up alarm clock. So when you wind something up, you basically have a key or something to turn the gears to set it so that when it comes to a certain number of rounds that the gears would go, it will start to make a sound and it will wake you up.
Yeah, I think I had a wind-up alarm clock when I was a kid as well, even though, as I said, I didn't really need it, but it was kind of fun. You could wind it up, and then you could see the little gears moving inside, and you could hear the tick-tock, and then, of course, the alarm would go off with this little hammer going back and forth between these two bells on top of the alarm clock. That was a lot of fun. And so, of course, with the invention of the wind-up alarm clock in 1876, people could set the alarm, and they wouldn't have an excuse to be late for work or school. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now to the second part and continue to talk about the alarm clock.
Indeed, it's no coincidence that the alarm clock was invented during the Industrial Revolution. This was a time when many people migrated from farm work organized around natural daily rhythms to factory work that was measured using artificial units of time. Still, workers who couldn't afford an alarm clock but lived close enough to the factory could rely on the factory whistle to wake them up each morning. And if the whistle's sound wasn't enough, some factories hired a knocker-upper. This worker's duty was to wake people up at an agreed-upon time by tapping on their doors or windows with a stick.
第二部分介绍名词 revolution， 它的意思是革命或是重大变革。例如 A revolution took place in France in the late 18th century. 18世纪末在法国发生了一场革命。再举一个例子 David's invention will bring a revolution to technological industry. David 的发明将为科技业带来一场重大变革。下一个我们看到动词 migrate， 这个字的意思是转移、移动或是移居，也可以是迁徙的意思。例如 Many media outlets are migrating to the social networking market. 许多媒体管道正转往社群网络市场。或是Michael migrated to the United States to work for a big company. Michael 为了替一家大公司工作而移居到美国。另外补充这个字的名词 migration, M-I-G-R-A-T-I-O-N, migration, 表示动物的迁徙或是移栖。可以说 The researchers spent years studying the migration of birds in the northern parts of the United States. 研究人员花了数年时间研究美国北部鸟类的迁徙。又或者说 This parade of elephants had a massive migration because there was no more food in their habitat anymore. 该象群进行了大规模的迁徙，因为它们的栖息地没有更多食物了。接着看到形容词 artificial， 这个字的意思是人工的、人为的或是人造的。例如 This product contains no artificial flavors. 这项产品不含人工香料。或是Sun Moon Lake is a natural lake, not an artificial one. 日月潭是天然形成的湖泊，而非人造湖。
Okay, so indeed, it's no coincidence that the alarm clock was invented during the Industrial Revolution. Now, here we're saying it's no coincidence that it was invented during the Revolution, the Industrial Revolution. Now, if you talk about a coincidence, that means two or more things are happening and they seem connected, but they really aren't. For example, one time I was traveling to New York City and by coincidence, I ran into my language partner. What the heck was that person doing in New York City during spring break? That was quite a coincidence. But in this particular case, it's no surprise that the alarm clock was invented during the Industrial Revolution. People needed to know what time to get up so they could show up at the factory at, 5 or 6 in the morning.
So the Industrial Revolution was basically a period of time when things started to change. So there were lots of different revolutions along our history. You had different political revolutions like the French Revolution. But in this case, the Industrial Revolution was a period in time where lots of things were starting to change to make our workforce or our daily lives a little bit more different and easier. Because during the Industrial Revolution, that was when more invention of lots of machines or technology was invented so that we can increase production. So they were creating more jobs in the factories. Now, the word revolution is basically a successful attempt to bring major change in something. So in the Industrial Revolution, they wanted to create more things, so they invented lots of machinery, and that changed how people were working and producing things.
Exactly. So as you said, a revolution could be political, the violent overthrow of a government like the American Revolution or the French Revolution, the Mexican Revolution, etc., etc. But again, a big change could also be described as a revolution. Like, for example, the telephone was a big revolution in the way people communicated. It was a big change. Before that, how did people communicate? Did they use carrier pigeon or something like that? Or they used the telegraph? But in any case, we're talking about this not being a coincidence. Of course, we would expect this to have happened during the Industrial Revolution. It's no coincidence that the alarm clock was invented then. And this was a time when many people migrated from farm work organized around natural daily rhythms to factory work that was measured using artificial units of time. So yes, indeed, during the Industrial Revolution, lots of people moved from the countryside to the city. And if you work on a farm, well, you have these natural daily rhythms. You don't really need to know what time it is. You can tell what time it is during the day by the position of the sun in the sky, or when the chickens are clucking at a certain time. You can pretty much tell when it's time to do certain chores and things like that. But then people started to migrate from the farm to the city. So if you migrate, you just move from one place to another. Usually it talks about animals migrating during the winter, for example, but you could use it to describe people who go from one place to another in order to work. Like, for example, in many parts of the world, there are migrant workers.
And here we also have the vocabulary word rhythms. And a rhythm is a strong, regular, repeated pattern of movement or sound. So when we dance or when we sing, we have to follow a rhythm. But in this case, these farmers, they are following the natural daily rhythms. So the natural daily patterns of what they have to do, what types of farm work they have to do at certain times of the day. So these were natural rhythms. They were so embedded into their daily habits that they didn't need a clock or they didn't need to know what time it was to do things. Now, when they moved to the cities and started to work in factories, they had to follow artificial units of time. So that meant that they had to follow strict schedules that were applied by the factory owners.
Exactly. So if something's artificial, it's just made by human beings. And before that, we had natural rhythms, again, just kind of getting a feel for the time of day, for the position of the sun, and the behavior of animals and things like that. We had a natural rhythm there. anywhere. But of course, if you're working in a factory, you need to know what time it is when you start working and when you take your break and when you have lunch and when you start overtime. You do need to have those artificial units of time. But still, workers who couldn't afford an alarm clock but lived close enough to the factory could rely on the factory whistle to wake them up each morning. So I guess the factory whistle did serve as an alarm clock, and lots of workers could not afford an alarm clock. I guess at one time they were very expensive.
There is a saying, time is money. So that is especially true for these factory owners because every second these factory workers are in the factories, they have to use their times wisely. And that's why they have to follow the schedule that the factory owners or the factory manager, the schedules that they set out. They have to come to work at a certain time. They have to get certain things done at a certain time. And their lunch could only be from noon for 1 hour and exactly 1 hour because they could not lose time because every single second they're producing things, they get to make money. But at that time, a lot of workers, they weren't very well paid. So they couldn't afford or they didn't have enough money to buy an alarm clock. And they lived close enough to the factory that they can hear the factory whistle wake them up each morning. So every factory, they will have a built-in whistle. And when somebody sounds the whistle, they'll tell them, hey, it's time to wake up, get ready for work. Maybe the whistle will sound 1 hour before they should get to work. And all of the workers that live nearby, they will hear it.
And continuing on here, it says, and if the whistle's sound wasn't enough, it wasn't efficient enough to wake up people, some factories hired a knocker-upper. And this worker's duty was to wake people up at an agreed-upon time by tapping on their doors or windows with a stick. So this is a term I had not heard before, a knocker-upper. That's a person who just knocks on your door with a stick at an agreed-upon time. So if it's agreed upon, people discuss this, and then they come to a conclusion, they come to an agreement, and they say, okay, we're going to tap on Mr. Wilson's door at exactly 6:05 a.m. in order to wake him up. And this person went door to door tapping on the doors. He probably had to do it rather quickly.
That's right. Hopefully he did it fast enough that maybe if you and I lived like 2 houses away from each other, but we worked at the same factory, he would have to make sure that he had enough time to walk from your house to my house.
Exactly. If he had to tap on the doors of 100 people, the time between the first door and the 100th door may be kind of long there, so I guess he probably had to hurry there. But again, that's what a knocker-upper was supposed to do. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's listen now to the third part.
There is, of course, a still simpler way to ensure that you wake up in time. Just drink lots of water before going to bed. This tried-and-true method is certain to get you out of bed to get started on your day.
第三部分来看动词 ensure， 意思是确保或是保证。例如 To ensure our safety, we should wear helmets when riding bicycles. 为了确保安全，我们在骑脚踏车时应该戴上安全帽。最后一个例句 Maggie ensured her wedding came together perfectly by hiring a professional wedding planner. Maggie 雇用专业的婚礼策划师，以确保她的婚礼一切完美。
Okay, to wrap things up, there is, of course, a still simpler way to ensure that you wake up in time. Just drink lots of water before going to bed. This tried and true method is certain to get you out of bed to get started on your day. And what that basically means is drink lots of water before you go to bed, and at some point, you're going to have to wake up and go to the toilet to release all that water.
Yeah, for most people that would be in the morning, but unfortunately for some people that would mean waking up at say 2 in the morning and having to pee then. So you'll probably have to find another tried and true method. a method that would guarantee results or would ensure that you wake up in time. So here we've got the word ensure. That just means to guarantee. And please note that it is spelled with an E. Insure. Don't confuse that with the word insure, I-N-S-U-R-E, insure. That means you go to an insurance company and you buy a policy from them. Maybe you buy life insurance or something in order to insure your life. In other words, if you die or something, then your wife or children can get some money or some payments. That's what life insurance is. And so that's insure with an I, but here ensure just means to guarantee. Okay, so that's a tried and true method there to drink water at night. I'm not so quite sure about that, but I'm sure most of you have a way to wake up in the morning. We all have our smartphones now, and I think we all rely on those. Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. Here comes Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文一开始写到 Past time-keeping devices made it possible for people to keep tabs on time. 过去的计时装置让人能够密切关注时间。那我们这边要补充2个重点。第一个是 keep tabs on 加上 somebody or something， 这是表达说密切注意什么什么的动态。那么 tabs 它的前方也可以加入 close， 像是 The police are keeping close tabs on the suspect， 警方密切监控那一名嫌疑犯的动态。好，那么第二个补充的重点是 make 加受词加受词补语，是表达说使某人或某事物成为什么或是变得怎么样。那么动词 make 在这边表示使变得或是使成为，而受词补语呢，我们可以用名词或形容词，像是 Dancing makes me happy， 跳舞使我变得快乐。那这边是用形容词 happy 来当受词补语。好，那接着如果这个受词是不定词 to V 的话，这时候就不能写作 make to V 然后再加受词补语，而是要改用虚受词 it 来代替这个受词的位置，然后把真正的受词 to V 移到句尾，所以这个句型就会变成 make it 受词补语 to 加原形动词咯。那这个不定词 to V 的前面你还可以加上 for somebody 或是 for something 去指出对象，就像课文它有提到说 made it possible for people to keep tabs on time， 这是表达说让人能够密切关注时间。好，那么 make something possible 是表达使什么成为可能，那这里的受词是不定词 to keep tabs on time， 这个受词呢当然就不能直接摆在 make 和possible 之间，我们就是用虚受词 it 去代替它的位置，然后把这个真正受词 to keep tabs on time 丢到句尾咯。好，那我们来造个例句，像 The internet has made it possible for us to connect with people from around the world。 网络让我们能够与世界各地的人联系。好，那么课文第二部分第一句他写到说，其实闹钟发明于工业革命期间并非巧合。那文中是用句型 It is no coincidence that 主词加动词去表达说点点点并非巧合，绝非偶然。那其中这个 coincidence 这个名词呢，它就是表达巧合同时发生，而 it 是虚主词，用来代替后面那个 that 子句，去表达说 that 子句所描述的内容并非巧合。好，另外如果我们是用 it is mere coincidence 或是 pure coincidence 或是 sheer coincidence 加上 that 子句，则是可以表达说什么什么纯属巧合，纯属偶然。举例来说， It was pure coincidence that they took the same flight to London。 他们搭同一个班机去伦敦，纯属巧合，并不是约好的，只是碰巧刚好搭到同一班这样。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Nevertheless, Kathy was very tired. Nevertheless, she continued working on the essay late into the night. Revolution. The invention of the printing press started a revolution in how knowledge is spread. Migrate. Recently, more and more readers have migrated to digital platforms for their reading material. Rhythm. Rudy found the daily rhythms of life in the big city both exciting and tiring. Artificial. The dam created an artificial lake used to supply water to nearby towns. Insure. We need to practice more if we want to ensure a victory in this weekend's game.
Discussion Starter starts now!
It's time now for our discussion starter. The question is, what do you think is the greatest benefit that the evolution of timekeeping devices has brought to mankind so far?
Personally, I believe the most remarkable advantage that has come from the evolution of timekeeping devices is how accurate certain devices can be. I have a funny story where my dad had two different types of watches. He had a mechanical watch on one hand and a digital watch on the other hand, and we were supposed to be racing. And he looked at his mechanical watch, he relied on that, but it turned out we were 1 second late to check in at our check-in point, and that gave us a 1-minute time penalty.
Ooh, that's an amazing difference there. So, of course, that's a remarkable advantage to have such clocks. But in my view, a standout benefit resulting from the evolution of timekeeping devices is the fact that the Swiss learned how to manufacture really expensive watches so that people could spend a lot of money on them, put them on their wrists, and go around and show off how much money they have.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoy reading along with us. I am Kiki.
I am Roger.
See you next time.